Hello, college football fans, and welcome to episode 22 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Good evening.
Hey. All right, so earlier this week we recorded our Nebraska-centric podcast on the Northwestern game, and today we are here to talk about the other games of Week 8 as well as the upcoming games of Week 9 in the national perspective of college football. So it's exciting stuff. We were talking on the last podcast about how there weren't as many obviously great matchups in terms of top 25 teams playing against each other. But there turned out to be quite a few upsets this week and some big close games.
That's true, especially I'm sure we'll get into them, but none bigger than that Georgia Tech, surprising victory over Florida State.
Certainly true. But before we dive into that, we have our tradition of cracking a beverage, which is my job for today. So here it is.
Okay. And it's only about 7 o'clock your time, but it's a little after 10 mine, right?
That's right. Since you started with it, we might as well talk about that. Yeah, I'm bummed because not bummed because I watched the Nebraska game, which was early in the morning, my time, Pacific time, and then later in the day, basically my whole afternoon was taken up because I was out at a birthday party with a friend, a birthday celebration. We went out of town, did this cool trip. It was fun, but it turns out there were some great games, and especially that I saw the highlight of that, the ending of the Georgia Tech Florida State game. I don't know if you've seen the version with the Georgia Tech radio announcers, but that's my favorite by far.
Is that right? I'll have to seek that out. I have not seen that one.
Oh yeah, they freak out. It's great because they were so close to losing that game, and then to come around with a blocked field goal and run it in. It's reminiscent of the crazy end of the Michigan State game just a couple weeks ago.
Right.
Yeah. And then on the last podcast, we also did predictions, as is our tradition. So there was one of the interesting games we talked about was the Utah-USC game, because even though Utah was much higher ranked than USC, USC was the favorite by some of the Vegas polls and stuff like that. And you and I both predicted a Utah victory. You said 31-21. I said 38-21. But as it turns out, that was probably the biggest upset of the week. They beat them 42-24, a pretty solid victory against what was looking to be the best team in the Pac-12.
Yeah, and I would we may have to roll tape on this, but you may recall in our discussion about that, I indicated that what's one of the frustrations of teams like USC. They have so much talent, and how good their roster is, but they maybe don't always provide that consistent effort, dedication, and focus that you would expect, or that you expect from championship level teams. And it's frankly the only thing that's keeping and holding them back, because it's not talent. And so you always worry about a team like that actually deciding to play as a team on the day they play you. And that's kind of what happened to Utah. They happened to hit USC and during the game in which USC decided to play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I guess if anything is going to inspire them to play would be playing on their home turf against, one of the top teams in the country.
Right, exactly. You got their full focus, and that's what you get is a great effort. None of the individualism that maybe has, haunted this team a little bit, and all of a sudden they look like world beaters. Now the question is, can they do that week in and week out? When we get around to talking about the national implications of who's going to win what leagues, there's some intriguing possibilities out there in the West because of USC.
Mm-hmm. And I should point out on those of us listening to our Nebraska-centric podcast probably heard us at the end talk about how we're going to wait and discuss the college football playoff rankings by the committee when we did this national podcast. However, we learned today that the rankings aren't coming out today. They're coming out on November 3rd, so it's still another week before they get to that.
Right.
But we're still going to talk about kind of our predictions for who we think are maybe the 4 teams that are going to make it to that playoff. But we'll get to that in a bit. Another interesting upset was Cal UCLA. UCLA was looking much better earlier in the season, then they had a couple losses. So Cal came into that game ranked 20th while they were unranked. But UCLA pulled that out 40-24, kind of a similar score to that USC game.
Yes, and UCLA has had such a difficulty with losses of team members. Their what am I trying to say? Gosh,
their injuries.
Their injuries are so bad that they've lost so many key players that people kind of wrote them off, and yet they seem to have righted the ship and are playing pretty good football.
That's right. And you, because I remember you were talking to me a little bit about this. That I believe it was MSU Indiana. Like at one point, it was like 14-13 because Indiana missed an extra point or something like that. Wasn't that game?
Yep.
Right.
Yes, it was. And they hung in there all the way. I think it was like 27-28 or something like that too. So I mean, Indiana hung with them, and then all of a sudden, Michigan State kind of separated itself in that later part of the game.
I'll say so. It was closer than the score would make it look.
I think so. Yeah.
The game. Yeah, 52-26 turned out to be the final score.
Right.
Another interesting Big Ten game. Ohio State, Rutgers. Ohio State crushed them 49-7. Seems like this whole switch to focusing on JT Barrett is working out nicely for them.
Yeah, I think so, and I think we'll continue to see that. What's going to be interesting is to see. We really haven't called on JT Barrett to do a lot of throwing of the football in situations where they needed to throw it, and so we'll have to see what happens when they find themselves in that situation, if they find themselves ever in that situation.
Right. And this isn't. You might have to tell me about this one because I didn't look into this one too much. Alabama 19, Tennessee 14. Oddly low scoring game, a defensive game. I'm not exactly sure what the story for that one is because I'm under the impression that Tennessee kind of gave it away near the end, kind of like they have with other games in the season.
I think there's some truth in that. I mean, certainly from the Tennessee perspective, they would probably view it that way. Alabama's defense is playing very good football right now, but their offense, especially if you get them in a situation where they have to throw it, is not real proficient. So Alabama's Achilles heel, it would seem, is if you could get them down early, and Tennessee was able to get them down early, then Alabama wasn't as dominant or prolific as you would expect them to be.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Another interesting matchup, Stanford-Washington in the Pac-12. Stanford won that 31-14, which now that Utah's lost, they're the only undefeated team, I believe, in the Big Pac-12 in terms of conference play. They're undefeated in their conference, so that positions them in an interesting spot within that division.
It sure does. I mean, the challenging part of Stanford's schedule is kind of still out there. I mean, they've had a couple of important games, obviously, already, but they still have to play Oregon. They're playing Washington State at Washington State this week, and Washington State's had a decent season this year, and I think that the coach for Washington State, the Pirate there, he is a guy that has always presented some problems for Stanford's team because defending his throw it every down kind of offense kind of takes them for a loop. Stanford's defense is a traditional kind of power dominant approach, and you play a team that basically has got a bunch of little scat receivers and is just flying all over the place, can sometimes present some problems for Stanford. So that's one I'll keep an eye on.
Mm-hmm. And then this is another one we predicted. This is actually the first time in our predictions that the two of us deviated in terms of who we thought was going to win the game. With the Texas A&M Ole Miss game, you had predicted a 45-28 victory for Texas A&M, while I predicted a 35-31 victory for Ole Miss. And neither of us turned out to be right in terms of the score, but I believe I get the credit there for predicting an Ole Miss victory. which is what ended up happening.
You absolutely do. And in fact, A&M, again, disappointing to me to see how that played out. And frankly, after losing their best player, I got to give Ole Miss some credit for being able to come back and have a pretty darn good defensive performance on the heels of losing their best player.
Mm-hmm. I actually saw an interesting little thing just as I was researching this that the SEC office is secretly rooting against Ole Miss because the only way that the SEC would be denied a chance at the playoff would be if Ole Miss were to win the conference, because then they'd be in a situation where like everybody had like at least one or two losses.
Well, I think it would be at least 2 losses because if Ole Miss were to win the league, obviously they already have 2 losses.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, they're hoping for either LSU to run the table and win the conference, or Alabama to run the table and win the conference. And the thing with Alabama right now, or I mean Ole Miss right now, is they have that win head-to-head against Alabama. So if it came down to them and Alabama, then that would be the tiebreaker, and Ole Miss would get to go to the conference championship game.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that'd be interesting, the scenario, if that's actually going to end up playing out, even though it's unlikely, but it would be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it sure would.
And then this is pretty crazy. How many weekends of college football can you remember where there were 2 games that go into quadruple overtime?
I know. And I didn't hear about the second one until later. I mean, I didn't see anything about it, but I did watch that Auburn Arkansas game. I was watching that one with great interest. It was pretty crazy.
Oh yeah, 54-46 the final score. Kind of stinks for Auburn. Their season's kind of fallen away from them, and if they had any hopes of being in that race for the SEC title.
Yeah, that's true. They're done. They're cooked.
Yep. And then the other one was Duke Virginia Tech 45-43, another hard-fought game.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
And again, I didn't see any part of that, and that is crazy.
Yep. And then and I think I did see there's the Pittsburgh-Syracuse game, and I think that one was on the same time. No, I'm thinking of something else, because I remember I was watching a Syracuse game, but I think that was the week where we with the Michigan State game, because that was one of the ones in the bar I was at.
I see.
But they lost. Syracuse lost to Pittsburgh 20-23, so another close game there. Interesting. Pittsburgh has edged its way into the top 25. They were 25 last week, and I think they've moved up to like 23 or something this week. Yep. And so then looking at the upcoming week, kind of similarly to week 8, week 9 doesn't have a lot of like games that are obviously like big time matchups. But there's still some good looking games. Ole Miss, Auburn, and Georgia, Florida stand out in the SEC for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Those are the ones I was going to mention.
Mm-hmm. And then Notre Dame, Temple is actually, I believe, the only matchup of 2 teams ranked in the top 25. Notre Dame's in the top 10, and Temple's 21, I believe.
Right, and Temple's undefeated. So speaking of those 12 undefeated teams, that certainly would be a game you would look at and say there's a chance there that Temple falls from the unbeatens. But it is at Temple, and if they're for real, that could be an interesting ball game to watch. I'm sure that might be one you're wanting us to predict, so I won't go right into that right now. But
okay.
Yep, and then in the Big Ten slate, an interesting game is Michigan at Minnesota. I think that one's kind of an intriguing matchup.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of depends on the Minnesota game that comes to play that day, kind of like we were talking about with USC, because we've seen Minnesota looking great this season in certain games, but then not so great in others. The fact that we were nearly able to beat them, So if Michigan plays to their potential, I think they're the comfortable victor in that game. But like you say, with it being in Minnesota's home stadium, could that give them a bit of an edge?
Yeah, well, and I believe, if I remember correctly, both Michigan and Minnesota had the week off. So both of them have had 2 weeks to prepare for this particular game. I don't remember whether Minnesota played anybody last week. I don't think they did, and I know Michigan didn't play last weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting into that mode where there's a lot of bye weeks going on now across the country.
Right.
Michigan State's in a bye this week. I think Ohio State also was in a bye this week.
Yeah, there might be. One quick question: what is Temple not in a? What conference are they in?
I think Temple is in that AAC, the American Athletic Conference, which ironically has 3 undefeated teams in it. It has the Temple team, the Houston team, and I believe
Memphis.
The Memphis team. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I don't know their schedules, but I'm gonna guess those teams haven't had to play each other yet, but that's probably
Correct.
coming up.
Yep, that's right.
So they'll beat up on each other a little bit there. This is something we kind of overlooked from week 8, but definitely one of the biggest stories coming out of that was that Clemson had an absolutely dominating victory over Miami, 58-0. In no small part due to Clemson's own talents and everything, but also due to the fact that Miami has basically just gone through a complete collapse. I mean, fans, yelling for the coach to be fired in the stands, people getting into fights, Al Golden getting fired, days after the game. I mean, it's a crazy situation there.
Yes, well, and it was inevitable almost. And the sad reality is, Al Golden had put together what would appear to be a pretty darn good recruiting class, and it'll be interesting to see if whoever they are able to get in that role as the head coach, especially if they go ahead and go with an interim coach and wait until after the season before they name a true formal successor, will they be able to hold on to that recruiting class, or will it deteriorate while the rest of the season plays out?
Mm-hmm. For sure. Going back to the Week 9 games, then actually I'm right. So Pittsburgh is ranked 23rd now, and they're playing North Carolina, who I believe is. I guess they must not be undefeated, but I think they're both like one-loss teams. Maybe.
I was going to say North Carolina lost to South Carolina in the first game of the year.
Okay, yeah, you're right. But so that might be an interesting matchup. Oklahoma State, Texas Tech in the Big 12, and Miami and Duke. That'll be interesting to see if they do get some sort of interim head coach. How are they able to bounce back from a defeat like that against a legit team like Duke?
Right, exactly. And it'll be interesting to see that, but it'll also be interesting to see how many people are in the stands, because that's at Miami again.
Well, yeah, which is, I remember that from our game with Miami as well, the Nebraska game. Like, it was weird for me to see a college football stadium that was that empty, when you could see, obviously, There's always red at Nebraska's games, but to see there being, a third of the stadium being red, and then the rest of the Miami fans, not nearly filling the whole thing. That was a little discouraging for that program.
Yes, and so we'll just have to see how that all plays out. But, in general, again, not a week filled with really dramatic, game matchups. But like last week, it'll probably produce some really great games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, particularly I think that Georgia-Florida game, I know neither of them are ranked in the top 25, but they're both still very talented squads, without a doubt.
Absolutely. Yep. And Tennessee, Kentucky should be good, too, in the SEC.
Yeah, that sounds interesting, too. So why don't we, before we dive into the playoff talk, I guess we should give a prediction, a score. Since you mentioned it, why don't we talk about that Notre Dame-Temple game? Although Temple's on this kind of roll, obviously being undefeated and all, I got to believe that Notre Dame is the better team, and I think they definitely win that football game. I'm trying to come up with the score right now. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm inclined to agree with you, Alex, that Notre Dame is the better team and should win that football game. But if you're going to point to a game and say, boy, that would be a fascinating and really great storyline kind of upset, then this would be the time. Temple is playing very well. They're well coached. and their coach is the hot item right now, um, and it's played at Temple. And in fact, I think it's not at their university stadium. It's at the Philadelphia Eagle Stadium or something. It's an unusual location, and it'll be a rocking atmosphere because, of course, everybody's getting behind the winner there in Philadelphia, where Temple's located. So I'm gonna still predict a Notre Dame victory, but I think it's going to be a tight one. I think it's going to be a game where Temple is so fired up, and the whole environment's going to be just electric.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go ahead and predict a Notre Dame victory, 31-24. Like you said, kind of a close victory, but I think Notre Dame pulls it out.
Yeah, that's what I would say as well.
All right, we're going to predict the same thing, doubling down.
Yes.
All right, cool. So talking about the college football playoff then, obviously we're not getting the rankings until next week, but we can still talk about who we think are the most likely people to win. Why don't we start with the most people who are most likely to win the 5 major conferences? Personally, my list is going to be, I think, Ohio State, even though they have a tough run in the later part of their schedule against Michigan State. I think they've been the number 1 team the whole season, and unless they get a major injury to somebody, I don't think that's changing. So I'm going to say Ohio State wins the Big Ten. I'm going to say that Baylor is the top of the Big 12. I think they're better than TCU. I'm going to say Clemson in the ACC, and I'll go in and say Stanford finds it in them to hold off USC and Oregon and those guys and continues their string in the Pac-12. And then I'll say it's tough. I'm struggling between Alabama and LSU in the SEC because Alabama is the team I want to say, but at the same time LSU is the undefeated team at the moment. So the momentum's kind of with them, and like you say, Alabama's proven that their offense isn't, as great as their past offenses have been. Maybe.
So you're gonna go with LSU?
Sure.
Okay.
Well.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
So I mean, mine aren't way different than yours, but I think there's one maybe piece of information we neglected to talk about, Alex, and it might change your perspective just a little bit on one of those choices. I'm going to say I agree with you that Clemson is the class of the ACC, and I'm going to suggest to you that they will continue their string and ultimately win the conference there and stay undefeated. I believe Ohio State will also do that in the Big Ten. I'm going to suggest that this week is going to be huge for the Pac-12 because I'm anxious to see how USC does. Because was that a one-game wonder type of situation with them, against Utah, or are they for real? And then obviously, if USC is going to emerge as the winner on that South side or Southern Division, they're going to have Utah lose, at least one more time, to be able to get there. You know what I mean? So I don't. I'm going to say that Stanford wins the Pac-12. So that's that one. Now, Big 12 is another story altogether. I'm going to suggest to you that this weekend's Oklahoma State is going to be an interesting game or an interesting team to watch because of they're very backloaded with their schedule. I think somewhere along the line they lose and kind of falter a little bit. I'm going to predict that Oklahoma is going to come from the ashes of that devastating defeat against Texas and end up emerging as the Big 12 representative because Baylor lost their quarterback.
Oh.
And I have a feeling that Baylor is not going to be able to win it out, and I don't think TCU, after watching a few of their games this season, I just struggle to believe that they'll be able to win all the games they have to win. So it'll be interesting to see, but I have this sneaky suspicion that Bob Stoops is going to do what he always does. He's got his team's attention after their ass kicking in in the against Texas, and they're going to end up winning the Big 12. And then the SEC, I kind of agree with you. It's very difficult to figure that out, and I guess I needed to scrutinize, which I didn't do, those particular schedules a little closer. But I believe that Alabama is going to end up being the team that wins the SEC West, and the SEC East is going to be the Florida Gators. And then after that, I think Florida beats Alabama in the SEC championship game, and it ends up being Florida.
Interesting. So you have Ohio State, Clemson, Stanford. You're basically the same as me, except you think it's gonna be Oklahoma and Florida.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. I was just looking up some schedules over here. Oklahoma has a. I was just Googling, the football team schedules. Oklahoma, in its last 3 games, upcoming, it has Kansas and Iowa State, who they should beat both easily. But they play at Baylor versus TCU and at Oklahoma State for 3 weeks in a row with no byes. That's a tough. That's a tough way to end your season.
Yeah, that's true. But I might be a little too bold with the OU prediction, but we'll see.
Yeah, but then at the same time, Oklahoma State, they have to play TCU, and then they have a Iowa State, and they have Baylor, and then they have Oklahoma. So, I mean, these last weeks are gonna, take down those undefeated teams in the Big 12. They're gonna kind of beat each other up and see who comes out on top.
And I think, and Baylor also has that same tough run. I mean, they have to play Oklahoma, TCU, and I believe Oklahoma State.
Yep.
So without their quarterback, I don't think they win all of those games. In fact, they might lose 2 of those 3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that just happened in this week's game then with Baylor.
Correct.
State.
Yeah, he has a neck injury of some kind. I mean, it's I don't know that it's life threatening or anything, but it's definitely gonna take some time for them to wait until that heals.
Right. Yeah, I might change my pick then, because their quarterback was like a real one of the strongest parts of their team, with him throwing the ball all over the place. So, I'm gonna go ahead and switch my pick then. I won't say Baylor, but I'm not gonna say Oklahoma. I actually think I'm gonna go ahead and say Oklahoma State. I'm gonna hope that actually I'm looking at their schedule right now. They do play TCU, Baylor, and Oklahoma within the next 4 weeks of play, but they have all of them at home. And
wow.
So I think I'm gonna say that gives them an edge, and since those teams also have to basically TCU, Baylor, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State all play each other in some way or another, over the course of these next 5 weeks. So I'm going to say Oklahoma State for the Big 12.
Now, do they get through that unscathed? Are they undefeated?
Are they undefeated? I mean, I'd say it would be tough for them to make it through completely unscathed, maybe with 1 loss. But
okay.
That's what I'll go with.
Well, all of this points to, Alex, this is the great thing, even in a season when you and I have had to battle through a miserable season for the Nebraska Cornhuskers as fans of that particular team. It's great to have all of this going on in the sport that we enjoy so much, and recognize that, man, it's going to be a great month of November. I mean, it really, really does set up for November to be just a spectacular and exciting month of college football, in which who knows who's going to emerge as the teams. It was pointed out on one of the stations I was watching just earlier today, briefly, about the fact that with the opening, the opening top 20 of the College Football Playoff Committee last year, Ohio State was ranked 16th in the very first poll they did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they ultimately won the thing. So you just don't know what's going to happen. Is there going to be another team like that that's sitting there in the wings with one loss. And right now, obviously, everybody point to Alabama as that probably the best one-loss team, but they're already back into the hunt in the top 10, I believe, in most polls, and probably will be with the first poll. So that won't be quite as,
Right.
from the far out reaches. But Stanford would be one of those teams that maybe would be from that far out region, and
Well,
or somebody like a two-loss Old Miss.
Right. Well, or honestly, your prediction of a Florida victory, I definitely think that's a stretch, but that could theoretically happen.
It is. I get it.
One thing, this is interesting because I'm looking at the AP poll right now for this week, and Memphis is ranked number 9th. They're the highest ranked of those undefeated non-Power 5 conference teams. So, presuming that they win their game that's this week, when it comes time for the playoff committee to rank them, how do you think they deal with an undefeated non-Power 5 team like that?
Well, I think initially they'll be fairly highly ranked. But the thing that's nice about this particular group that does the playoff, they relook at everything every week. And so as these Power 5 conferences start playing each other, for the big boys, so to speak, for this year, they'll just see that team, frankly, slowly kind of slide back a little bit, unless all the Power 5 teams start beating up on each other. What Memphis would need to have happen would be for all of those teams to kind of knock each other off, and nobody come out of that unscathed. Somehow Ohio State gets beat. Michigan State gets beat. All these undefeateds get beat, except for Memphis. And then they go off on a string of victories, including Houston and Temple, and then they have the quality victory of a Old Miss team, and then the wins against other credible teams from their conference, and maybe they would be able to slip in there somehow. That would be pretty fascinating to see that happen in just the second year of the playoff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, looking at their schedule, they play both Houston and Temple back to back, both away. So if they could, if both Houston and Temple, continue to do well, and they manage to beat both those teams away and come out of all that undefeated, I think they'd have a pretty strong.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing they would need is for Old Miss to keep winning.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Like we said, that's a scenario that could kind of mess up the what do you want to say, the SEC as it stands right now in terms of going to that game. That's interesting. Actually, I'm looking at this is LSU's schedule right now. They actually only have 4 games left, not 5, because they have a bye week. They have a bye week this upcoming week, and then they play Alabama after that at Alabama, which is definitely going to be the do or die moment for them, I think.
Okay, and so that is at Alabama. See, that's huge. I give Alabama a little edge there on that one. That's why I'm predicting Alabama wins the West.
Interesting. And then because if they could beat Alabama, then they have Arkansas at Ole Miss and Texas A&M, which I think they could beat those teams, with Ole Miss being probably the toughest opponent of that strength. But anyways, so based on our teams, I'm going to go through them again. I said Ohio State, Clemson, Stanford, LSU, and Oklahoma State. You said Ohio State, Clemson, Stanford, Florida, Oklahoma. Now, in my scenario, LSU is probably still. I'm gonna say they beat Alabama, and they basically go out. They are undefeated by the end of this season. They win the SEC championship game. So under my scenario, I think Ohio State, Clemson, and LSU would be like the ones that I'd say are the easy picks for going into that top 4, particularly if they're all undefeated, which they all theoretically could be. So then it becomes a tough pick between Stanford and Oklahoma State for that number 4 spot. What do you think about that comparison?
Between Stanford and Oklahoma State, then I would say if Stanford wins out in their schedule, and I would say Stanford gets the nod, and regretfully the Big 12 goes without again.
Yeah, because I did say this would be Oklahoma State losing one game in that
Right,
stretch, probably.
right. Now, if Oklahoma State wins out and is undefeated, I think they get in.
Right. Right, because Stanford already has one loss, even if everything else
Correct.
goes as they want
Correct.
in their conference. So,
Now, and your scenario for the playoff, you're forgetting one team,
oh yeah,
Notre Dame.
Notre Dame. That's true.
So my scenario is that I can't imagine, unless it ends up being a 2-loss victory or victor of the SEC, like an Ole Miss. I think that Florida, in my scenario, gets in. I argue that an undefeated Ohio State, definitely is in. I say a third team is Clemson, and the fourth team is Notre Dame, because they play Stanford last game of the year, and I believe that's at Notre Dame. So I believe.
Actually, it's at Stanford. I'm looking at it right now.
Oh, it is. It's at Stanford. Okay. Well, even so, I'm going to suggest to you that Notre Dame wins that game, and as a result, they get in. Stanford does not, because now Stanford has 2 losses, so they're out. And then if the scenario that we talked about, in my case, Oklahoma, with a 1-loss, blowout loss to Texas on their resume, and Notre Dame's only loss being a last-minute loss to a Clemson team that's already undefeated and in the playoff, I think Notre Dame gets in, and Stanford and Oklahoma or Oklahoma State are on the outside looking in.
Interesting.
So there's my scenario.
So your Final Four is Notre Dame, Ohio State, Clemson, Florida.
Correct.
Interesting. And then I said mine would be Ohio State. Well, now I hadn't considered that Notre Dame game for Stanford. But in my scenario, if Stanford wins the Pac-12, then I would say that they beat, since at Stanford they beat Notre Dame in their home stadium, and so then I think if that's the case and they win the Pac-12 championship game, they have the edge over Oklahoma State in terms of strength of schedule. So in my scenario, I would say Ohio State, Clemson, LSU, and Stanford would be the top 4.
Right. Okay. Yep. And that makes more sense. And yours is probably more likely than mine. I'm playing a little devil's advocate and just saying, look at how interesting it could be.
Yeah. Well, that's what's so exciting about this new system. Like you say, Ohio State was not even in the conversation really at week 9 of last year. So you don't know what will happen. It will be interesting to see. Let's say, for instance, that because if one of these Big 12 teams that's currently undefeated makes it through the rest of the season and stays undefeated, then I think they're pretty much a clincher for getting in. But if they have one loss again, whether it's Baylor, TCU, Oklahoma State, or Oklahoma, like you say, if they went out and then their one loss is to Texas, like I just said, I mean, in my scenario, if Stanford beats Notre Dame and wins the Pac-12 championship game, then they beat out Oklahoma State in terms of having strength of schedule and going into that playoff game. So does the Big 12 get left out again this year?
I think it's certainly a possibility. I don't know whether there'll be enough members on that committee that will feel bad about what happened last year, and they will lean heavily on giving the credit to that team. If it's TCU or Baylor, I would say they would get that nod. If it's Oklahoma, they get the nod because Oklahoma is a traditional power like they are. If it's Oklahoma State, I think there's a very real possibility that they get snubbed a second year in a row.
Really, just because Oklahoma State doesn't have the prestige of an Oklahoma?
Yep, I think they're a little more off the radar, so to speak, and I think that's where some of that just subconscious stuff starts to play in.
just like they talked about last year. If last year the two teams that were tied for the Big 12 were Oklahoma and Texas, and both of them had the kind of years that TCU and Baylor had, those teams are in. One of those teams gets in.
Mm-hmm. Admittedly, looking at Oklahoma State's schedule up to this point, they've played Central Michigan, Central Arkansas, Texas San Antonio, Texas, Kansas State, West Virginia, and Kansas. Not exactly the toughest schedule, certainly.
Exactly. I think they're going to lose a few games.
Right, but then like with everything else, it really comes down to these last 5 weeks because that's where they play TCU, Baylor, and Oklahoma. So all the best teams in their conference, they gotta make it through. Which is why I think if one of those teams, any of them, can make it through that ringer and beat all the rest, I think they would have a strong argument for being in that playoff.
I agree.
All right. Well, this is what makes it such an interesting time to be a college football fan. We get to speculate about all this, and we'll see what upsets the Week 9 brings us and what the committee has to say about it next week.
Right. And, we've spent a lot of time here tonight talking about all these scenarios and just teams in general. At some point, I want to take an evening to take a step back and talk about the sport in general and some of these issues that are kind of percolating under the surface about the sport of college football, and seeing where we think that might be going or headed down the road. So with that, that's our teaser for down the road.
There we go. All right. Well, if you enjoyed this podcast, you can find us on footballthrowdown.podomatic.com. You can also find us on iTunes. You can leave us ratings and reviews there. Leave us a comment on the Podomatic website or on the app. We always like hearing from the fans. And thank you for listening out there, college football fans. And thank you, Dad, for joining me for this wonderful podcast. Until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.